Welcome to the Lance Wallnau Show. I have a very special guest today, an innovative consultant. How do you describe yourself? I know you as a prophet, a prophetess, a global consultant with leaders, a coach, and a counselor. But how do you describe yourself if you're talking to somebody that is outside of our world? How would you say?
A mother of 5, grandmother of 2, husband 41 years. No, I don't really have titles. So I never was raised with titles, and so I don't really think about that. But I do have passions.
You've been married to Wesley 42 years?
41 and a half
What
years.
the heck? You seem so young. You're too young to be a grandma. You got one of those young. It's like my wife's. You got that little bit of the hippie flair about you, like Patricia King. You know, it's like always young, like Flower Child. There's something eternally young about
I was
that.
too young for Flower Child. I was too young for that.
But you have a very young spirit about you. Even in your prophetic, you have an attraction even to young people. I know that you still have youth come to you because they feel like you're an open, innovative.
Well, the
spirit.
reason for that is that when I was in my 20s, and now I'm in my 60s, I'm 61 and a half, but when I was in my 20s, as a Baptist, and the Holy Spirit fell on me, one of the first things he spoke to me about, and I began prophesying, which I'd never done, was very anti all that, but he began to talk to our church about the children. The children. I mean, it was a byword. It was the children. Everything was about the next generation. So I had a 2-year-old, and I figured since God was talking about children, I should teach children. So I taught 2-year-olds for 5 years. And in that time, I began to get absolutely convinced that the way to change society was to go to the young. The Jesuits used to say, give me a child till he's 5, we'll have him for life. And I began to say, okay, let's do these discipleship programs for 2-year-olds, 5-year-olds. You know, let's get him doing all these things. So I began very early to connect with people 20 years older.
I tell you, you convicted me now because I just did an interview with George Barna last week.
Yes.
And Barna says worldview is solidified by 11.
I know.
But you and I have so much in common, and sometimes, and what's fun about it is we kind of work our way to a conclusion that is independent of each other because we're coming out from different directions. And you're preaching in this great consultation we're having here in Waxahachie, Texas.
Yeah, can you believe it? I can't even say that.
I've never been. I live in Texas. I've never been to Waxahachie, and but you were talking about the apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, and how the first, the proton, the first one is the apostle going in. But then you mentioned about how the apostle Paul went to places where Christ wasn't preached, lest he build on another man's foundation.
Right.
And then I had to step out and do a political, interview here, and I missed it, but I saw I could catch it on the video later. But I wanted to know where you went from there, because then I heard you segue into, we desperately need to not be focusing on second heaven, whereas third heaven is like the throne of God, second heaven is the satanic cosmos, first heaven is the atmospheric earth. And we can't be drawing our insight from what's going on the earth because it's getting worse.
Right.
We have to go into an innovative perspective from third heaven down and bring practical, fresh ways of resolving problems in the form of opportunities that God's giving us to innovate. I left at that moment intrigued by the direction we're going in.
So
take me to the rest of the message.
My point is that first apostles, because apostles are visionaries. And then I quoted, Romans 15:20, where Paul said, I'm going where Christ has never been preached before. And that's an apostolic mission to not build on any other man's foundation. And so he did that in the context that Jews had never gone to Gentiles. They knew that that was their role. It was their prophesied role to be a light to the Gentiles, but they'd never actually done it before. They'd built cities, nations, etc. And so when Paul is saying that, it's giving us a clue into apostolic building. It is to go where Christ isn't. And as a fivefold apostle, we equip the saints to go do the work of ministry and take new territory. I mean, that should be such basic Bible that all of us should be doing that. But instead, we have a come move of God where the apostles are building a church, period. So we have a subculture.
And here is the essence of the problem. Stacey, I just see it now for the first time. And that is
I really
that
help you. come up with good ideas.
You gave it to me. You just gave it to me. And here it is. The apostle goes to where Christ hasn't been yet, and they pioneer so that Christ is in that territory.
So the visionary looks to see what needs to be done, and the prophet, Ephesians 2:20, goes with him, and you have vision and revelation together building into new territories. And then behind them come the pastors, teachers,
so
evangelists.
We might say, and it might be a stretch, but the apostles are frequently the pragmatists, the construction, the architects of what, this point has to be with this point. The sequence is going to be first the plumbing, then the electric. Whereas the prophet sees a finished house and hovers over, I see the room, and I see it's going to be done this way. They're looking at the end from the beginning also. Mm-hmm. But what I'm seeing is that the apostles, when they get stuck with a revelation of salvation instead of the kingdom, they end up innovating in 1,000 ways just how to preach salvation.
Wow.
They do not think about taking the gospel of the kingdom where Christ hasn't been preached yet in journalism, in law,
wow.
in court, in education, in economics, in governments. In other words, this is where the body of Christ, 90% of the church isn't called to be in the temple. My background is Levitical, so Ashkenazi Jews, Levites were 10% of the population in Israel. They were set apart to be the temple teachers and priests. 90% actually transformed the land.
Right.
Because the other tribes
built the cities.
They built the cities. They ran the governments. They collected the taxes. What we've done is we put all that energy out there focused on what we're doing,
right?
Instead of us equipping them for what they're doing. And it's getting late in the day, and we're watching the price we're paying.
Right. Yeah. Very, very true. And so I've long been on this trajectory because, God said about the children, so I went to the next generation. And so then I'm very in touch with what the next generation thinks and feels. And they're leaving the church en masse. So we've spent all this energy to build these mega churches that now the next generation isn't even interested in, and we haven't actually discipled them to function in their spheres of influence or their passions, because only 10% has ever been max called.
I never thought of that. This is a disturbing thought, that the church growth movement, the mega churches, that they've succeeded in building what the adults want as consumers. But they failed to build what the next generation would be attracted to. So what is the next generation attracted to?
Well, oddly enough, a lot of next generation people are very concerned. Like my children's friends grew up in the church, are exceptionally concerned about the environment because they perceive it as an existential threat. So when they've gone to university, etc., they actually think that this is going to be a big problem for them. And so my niece is one of them. She's invented a thing called rain stick shower, her and her husband, and to actually conserve water from every shower that a person takes. And one of my son's best friends, he has invented something. He just won the Innovation Tech Prize of the Year at the Dubai Symposium. I mean, he just won first place in inventing this thing, which is a tree planting drone that can exponentially plant trees where there's been fires or erosion or whatever has happened, floods. Anyway, so he just won this huge world global prize. But he has had these conversations with me, fierce conversations, about about why doesn't the church, why don't Christians care about the environment? And, it's something that affects every single person on the planet, and why don't they care about it? And I was kind of over on one sort of political line of thought, never ever thought about the environment. And I said, well, we care for children. We're caring for the poor. We've raised millions of dollars for the poor of the earth. We care for the people. He said, well, they're not going to. Anyway, so we would have these fierce conversations.
Hey there, you just listened to an excerpt. That's a little bit of the podcast. So if you want to get the whole thing, because there's a lot more content there, go to lancewallnau.com/podcast. And instead of getting an excerpt, you get the entire message. Friends, the news headlines prove only one thing, and that is that the world is actually a very fragile place right now. And that means the time to prepare is now for more instability. So let me ask you, do you have enough emergency food on hand to get you through a severe shortage? Most people actually don't. That's why I recommend the My Patriot Supply. And right now at lancewallnau.com/patriot, you could save $150 off of a Vital 3-month emergency food kit. That's a kit that actually contains a whole lot of different kinds of meals. They're actually tasty. They got 2,000 calories a day in them. And we're talking about breakfast and lunch and dinner and a combination of different meals. That's going to be lancewallnau.com/patriot. Save your $150. Get a hold of the 3-month food supply and do it now. Don't be a victim. Don't live at the last minute and decide that you're going to do it when they don't have the product, but take action. lancewallnau.com/